Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 23rd of April, comes to you from New York. And it's about 8:30 in the morning here, 1:30 in the afternoon in the UK. And we're seeing here the dollar index is still in this very long sideways range. The longer this range goes on, then the bigger this breakout is going to be, either to the downside and the upside. Of course, we've got a downside target, but we really do need to wait for the break. If we look at the short-term chart, we've had this downside target not quite met, remembering that's bullish confirmation of a downside target is not quite met, and then we now are moving above the cloud into a new slight uptrend on the dollar. So that means dollar strength, and most other currencies are therefore weak against the dollar. Looking at Bitcoin, we are on the short-term chart. This is the 60-minute chart. We're waiting to see if we activate this upside target. The daily chart, we're just starting to nudge 3-month highs. We still do have these targets hanging over us. We are outside the cloud on the price, but not on the lagging line, so it leaves us in a bit of a neutral phase. US markets are not yet open, but the futures are slightly down. We are holding on to the all-time highs set last week, so the fact we're holding those gains is pretty strong. We're seeing European markets down around 0.5%. This is the UK future. The DAX in Germany is a little bit better off, and we can see here that we are still struggling to make new highs there, whereas on the UK market, that trend has looked stronger, not making new highs though the same way the US is. So in relative terms, not as strong, and we've got mixed targets, a mixed picture, leaving us a little bit neutral. In Asia, most markets were down. The Middle East crisis still weighing on Asian markets that have a very high susceptibility to the oil price. And if we look at even things like India down 1%, still very much below the cloud, recovery and then falling away again. So really quite key there. And even if we look at Oz down as well, waiting to see if we activate this downside target now. A lower high, lower low scenario would not be good for the Aussie market. And you can go to the 60-minute chart to get a little bit of a heads up on that. Now, of course, all eyes on the Middle East. In terms of Brent crude, this is literally just sitting very flat at the moment. These are the 1-minute targets here. And they've been given, so it's thrills and spills. I analysed this late last night before I went to bed in New York and sent it out to clients. And quite interestingly, we are just, we have still got strong upside potential. This 105 level for Brent crude is pretty critical, and we're hitting some resistance there at the moment. But a target potentially higher still. Seeing gas prices in Europe higher as well. And things like jet fuel, the announcement that Lufthansa are cancelling, I think it's 20,000 flights. We see here we've got this range. This is jet fuel, but it's elevated. And if we look at the daily chart, you can see what airlines were paying consistently around those levels. And then all this volatility has created real uncertainty there for jet. So that's the effect of the Strait of Hormuz, and we're all seeing things like fertilizer, LNG prices, all still very elevated, which is potentially going to have a global effect, and that means that bond markets are still looking a little bit worrying. We've got Japan. This is the daily chart. Japan, again, we make a new high here. That's not great news. The US 10-year yield, we've got an upside target here still in place. And if we go to the UK market, the UK gilt is building a base again and looking set to move back. The closing high there was 5%. So 5% is a really critical number for the UK. And we've got quite a lot of targets pointing 5.12, 519, 533, 535. There are downside targets, but we are above the cloud, so it is a little bit worrying for the UK. And if we look at other markets, we've got Germany and big targets there as well, multiple upside targets. So it's just a case, if this situation is prolonged in the Middle East, it is going to filter through to inflation and bond markets. So certainly one to watch. We are seeing gold just flat this morning. Still got this upside target. We are really still below the cloud. So we are still negative. We got downside targets. Here's the range. Failed the recovery, failing on the short term, and a mixed picture there. And silver looks even worse, really. Downside targets here as well. Looking at the tech majors in the US, we had quite good rises yesterday. Apple looking stronger, but it is still none of these stocks are making new all-time highs. It's really quite interesting. And if we look at Amazon, for example, we're not making a new time high there, but this is the closest to making a new time high. Results out from Tesla. They initially the price went up after hours and then fell back. So a little bit of a flurry in the price in expectation of those results, but the reality is we are still below the cloud. Not looking great. You could go to the 1 minute chart if you're watching any of these stocks, of course. So looking at the Dow, Boeing was the big performer there, up 5%. So really quite interesting, but the chart itself is, really not clearly in an uptrend, and so that was the key thing. Nvidia, which is really the one to watch for making a new high. October was the previous high. Notice the downside targets coming off the chart because they've been deactivated with a move above where the selling thrusts were given, so that's really quite key. Looking at the Nasdaq 100, ARM Holdings, very strong performance here yesterday, up 12%, and that's really going to the targets that were given. So multiple targets given there, and if we look at the 60-minute chart on ARM, we've got even potentially higher still to go. This is a triangle breakout effectively, and that's really moved much higher. That's quite key. Micron also upside targets on the short term, and on that medium term chart, a new upside target activated yesterday, much higher. We're seeing a lot of these secondary stocks like chips and drives, a lot of these secondary stocks really driving things higher here, and a really clear breakout there on AMD. No clear targets. You don't always have a target, but a really clear trend. So that's pretty amazing. And then last of all, let's look at the UK market, the FTSE 100, the top stocks in the UK. First of all, we look at the top performers. You can see there's not many, and that's a key thing. And quite often these top performers, London Stock Exchange, we have seen a turnaround. You remember that activist investor came through, so that's looking quite strong there. Anglo American up 2.7%, not yet making new highs. This is the key thing. Not many stocks making new all-time highs. Ricketts, not looking good there, downside target. And so if we go to the other end of the market, we are seeing this morning some quite big falls in supermarkets. So here's Sainsbury's. They didn't get to activate an upside target and now falling back on the price. So that's really quite key. And if we look at Tesco's, they're down 3% as well. Did activate one upside target, but not the other. Again, a mixed picture, hitting resistance at around 500p. So really quite significant there. But we've got more stocks rising than falling, and some of these stocks have had a really, a battered time. So this is Relx. They found a floor at 2,000, but really interestingly, we had some upside targets. They're nearly met, but this is a very slow, harsh recovery after such big falls. That's it for today. Tomorrow I'm in Salt Lake City in Utah, and I'll do my best to get Charles today out. I've got meetings, and then I'm on the road, and then in Seattle on Monday. So that's it for today. Have a good day. Happy charting. Bye for now.